Hello, amazing. What do you do when something goes wrong at the last minute? Welcome to Reframes, the podcast where we invite you to take a different perspective on life. I'm Matthias Jakobsen. And this question brought me back to a situation in my life in the summer of 2016. The summer of 2016, I spent traveling around the world teaching one-day courses in visual thinking. And this particular story was in the late summer. I was on my way to London. I had set up a class there, and my dear friend Sarah had helped find a lot of people that were interested, and they'd all signed up. And it was all ready and set to go. I had booked a flight in the last minute. And so I was ready to go to London. And I had this group of people, I think about 25, almost 30 people, signed up, paid for this class. And then I got sick. I could feel it on my way to the airport. I could feel it as I got on the plane, as I tried to sleep on the plane flying over Iceland, having a stopover and then onwards to London. I could just feel myself, getting a fever, getting worse and worse. And what's the right course of action in a moment like this, where something is set up, something is ready to go, and something goes wrong like this? In my case, in this particular story, it wasn't just that, it would be a hassle to reschedule and refund everyone and try to do it again. But it was really the income of my family depended on this course. And so I went through with it and had a bunch of Advil and taught the class with a fever. And it wasn't the most, I would say, enjoyable teaching experience in my life, but I knew I could do it, and so I did. But this is just an example of what I'm talking about with something going wrong in the last minute. But I don't think it teaches us very much about how to think about it. But one thing that I think could help is something I've been obsessing about lately, which is airplanes. And there's this thing when an airplane takes off, if you have an airplane with two jet engines, like a typical passenger commercial aircraft, one of the things the pilots do before they accelerate down the runway is that they calculate a speed, and this speed is called V1, and it's at this speed. This is the speed where imagine you're going down the runway. The engines are at full blast. The plane is accelerating. You have more than 100 people, 100 lives on board. You're the captain of the plane, and you're going faster and faster down the runway. And then one of your engines blow off. What do? I think for most people, it seems that the natural thing to do, if you have 100 people in the back of the plane and one of your engines just blew off and you're moving fast down the runway, is that you try to stop the plane. You try to bring it to a halt, it seems stupid to do anything but that. But there is such a thing with airplanes, that you can get to a speed where the plane is going so fast that it's actually no longer very safe to try to stop the plane before the end of the runway. But you're also not going so fast that you can take off. And this point is what is called V1. And so the reason you calculate this and you practice this as an airline pilot is because it's the counterintuitive point where once you reach V1, you can no longer abort the flight. So even if one of your engines basically blow off, you're still going to let the other engine keep accelerating the plane. And again, this has been calculated. You know that this is possible. So even with one engine blown off, the other engine will still keep accelerating the plane a little bit slower, but it will. Keep accelerating until you get to the point where you can rotate the nose upwards and the plane will take off. So, first of all, I think this is just a fascinating thing. I only discovered this a couple of weeks ago, but it's fascinating to me that you can take off a huge plane with one engine missing, or with one engine like malfunctioning halfway through it. But I think it's also a good mental model for how to think about these bad things that can happen. And the point is that you can in advance calculate at what point is it the point of no return. What point do you reach the V1 where you're now saying, okay, we're going to go through with this, and even if it means that in the moment I'll have to do something that seems counterintuitive, such as proceeding with a takeoff with an engine that is now suddenly missing an engine. And so I think what I want you to take away from this story and from this metaphor is, as you approach something in your work, perhaps similar to my visual thinking course in London, or another critical moment in your work, can you calculate what is the equivalent of the V1 speed? That point where okay, even if something goes wrong and my instinct would be to cancel and postpone, at this point it's actually best to follow through. Or it could also be the inverse and say, I know that when I get this close, my instinct will be to push through, but it's actually not a good idea. I actually need to, even at the last minute, cancel. Again, it depends on the situation. The point is not about follow through, as in the airplane. The point is that you, in advance, decide what is that point where you might need to do something that would be counterintuitive to you in that moment. Calculate it, set that action, and rehearse that. That's the takeaway. All right. Thank you for listening to Reframes, the podcast where we invite you to take a different perspective on life. Perspectives that include learnings from airplanes and other things that I'm fascinated about. This podcast is produced in a very delightful collaboration with Nikki Schmickis. And both of us would love to hear from you if you have any comments or thoughts or questions, and would love to find a way to incorporate those into the future episodes. Thank you for listening. My name is Matthias Jakobsen.